Hey y'all, it's Dr. Brown back here again. This time we're going to be talking about blood vessels and specifically the walls of blood vessels. So although we have both arteries and veins, and arteries come in various types. You have elastic arteries and you have muscular arteries. You have small arteries and arterioles, which are even smaller. And like veins, you have little bitty venules and larger veins. There are three fundamental layers that can be found in the wall of a blood vessel, and it's modifications to those three layers that impart function to those different types of blood vessels. So if you know what the three layers are and what goes into making them, then you can recognize how those layers are modified and how those modifications will enable, say, an elastic artery near the heart to function differently than, for instance, a venule draining one of the peripheral tissues. So let's jump right in and look at these. So we have a cartoon on the left and an actual micrograph on the right. And you can see in the cartoon that the three main layers of an artery, in this case, have been labeled. And while we're using an artery as our example, that's because these arteries have all the things that you could see. And all the other things we're going to look at, the different types of arteries as well as veins, are going to have some or all of these, but this has everything in it. So that's why we're using it as an example. So the innermost layer of a blood vessel is referred to as the tunica intima. It's also sometimes called the tunica interna. You'll see both of those depending on your textbook. And this is going to be the one closest to the lumen. So if we look at our micrograph over here, the lumen of any hollow thing is the hollow space in the middle of it. And the tunica intima is going to be comprised of up to three different structures, two of which are labeled in our cartoon. So the endothelium is the layer of endothelial cells. Remember, those are just epithelial cells that point inward. And these are going to be closest to the lumen. So it's going to resemble a squamous epithelium, a simple squamous epithelium, very closely. Underneath that, and not labeled in the cartoon, so we'll just have to label it here, is a subendothelial layer. And it's really just a basal lamina. So it's a loose connective tissue. So you've got some areolar tissue under here. You can see they've even, the people who drew this cartoon, is a guy named Michael Blau, I think his first name is Blausen. You can see the type 1 collagen fibers and the elastin fibers and stuff that he's rendered in there. And then finally, an internal elastic membrane, or your textbook uses the term internal elastic lamina. Remember, lamina just means layer. So some blood vessels are going to have all three of these. They're going to be various thicknesses. Some, your simplest blood vessels, the capillaries, just have an endothelium and the subendothelial layer. That's it. The middle layer of the blood vessel here is called the tunica media, and it's primarily comprised of smooth muscle. However, change my pen color down here, there can be, and especially in your larger arteries closer to the heart, where there's a lot of force being exerted on them, in between the layers of smooth muscle, you can also find little elastic lamina inside the tunica media. So the tunica media is always going to have smooth muscle, but it can also contain these elastic laminae, these layers of elastic tissue that help provide support to the tunica media. The tunica media can, but doesn't always, end in an external elastic membrane. You see these especially in the elastic arteries of the lungs. And then finally, the outermost layer is the tunica externa, also called the tunica adventitia. And the tunica externa, or tunica adventitia, is largely connective tissue. It's going to help anchor the blood vessel in the tissues through which it's running, but it can also contain, not shown in this picture, little bitty arteries and veins of its own. So in some blood vessels, these tissues in the tunica intima and tunica media can get blood and nutrients from the can get oxygen and nutrients from the blood flowing through the blood vessel. But in your larger blood vessels, larger arteries, or in your veins where this blood may not be accessible, or it may not contain a lot of oxygen and nutrients, then you got to have your own blood supply to the outer portion of the blood vessel to supply oxygen and nutrients to the more peripheral zones. And these blood vessels found in the tunica externa are collectively referred to as the Vasa Vasorum, which I know is a very Harry Potter sounding word, but it simply means the vessel of the vessels. So it's the blood vessel for a blood vessel. So let's look at these things over here in the micrograph on the right. So we can see I've labeled the lumen here. The tunica intima is here. So in between the two blue lines I just drew. So you can see here the kind of darker colored border. That's the internal elastic lamina. So everything to the outside of the blue line I'm drawing is tunica intima or tunica interna. The tunica media is going to be all this business here. So that's the tunica media. And you can see the pink staining or red staining smooth muscle. And you can see that there are some elastic laminae in this particular artery. And then finally, labeled number 6 out here, this is the tunica externa or tunica adventitia. So let's look at this one more time on an unlabeled micrograph and see if we can distinguish these layers. So let's switch back to the red pen, I think. That'll show up better against this purple. The lumen here, you can actually see these are red blood cells here. Those are all a bunch of erythrocytes there. The tunica intima, or tunica interna, runs from the internal elastic lamina, which in this micrograph is stained dark purple, all the way out to here. So that's the tunica intima. The tunica media goes from just underneath the internal elastic lamina to the external elastic lamina. This is a lung artery. That's why it's got the external elastic lamina or external elastic membrane. And then finally out here we can see the tunica externa or tunica adventitia. So tunica interna here, tunica media here, and then tunica externa here. Hopefully that helped. You can identify these three. We're going to have some more opportunities to practice throughout our module on circulatory systems, but that's it for now. Study hard. See you later.